continue with that theme and discuss the use of violence in Parliament. And listening in on that conversation is Ms. Lebogang Ramafoko, CEO of Oxfam South Africa. Ma'am, good morning to you, and thank you very much for availing yourself. When you saw those scenes unfold in Parliament, what thought came to mind?
I think the scenes are very regrettable, and indeed to see men dragging women in that manner, some being dragged by their hair, being, treated with such indignity, is really worrying in a country with such levels of violence. But I want to also ask ourselves if we are holding the political parties that are using tactics in Parliament to basically block debate and discussion, whether or not in their actions as parties, they themselves are not being violent. Because the scenes before, you could see the speaker basically either not recognizing people who insisted that they needed to talk when it wasn't their turn to talk, or using the whole issue of the Parliament rules to ensure that somebody else doesn't talk, and being asked to leave and refusing to leave. So as much as with the previous speaker, we can talk about the very disgusting and violent action of those that were then called in to get them out of Parliament, let's talk about what are the tactics that we expect parliamentarians to use in order for dialogue to happen. We have a multi-party system in South Africa simply and precisely because we want dialogue. And I want to believe that when, for an example, the EFF came into Parliament and they really changed what happens in Parliament, and we as a society, some of us, myself included, applauded the fact that the decorum in Parliament was being shifted from when they fought to come in Parliament with the way that they were dressed. There is also time for us to say, are the tactics of making sure that people do not speak, raising on a point of order, when in fact it's not a point of order, it is a point of basically hurling insults at each other as parliamentarians. Isn't that in itself a form of violence? When in fact, as South Africans, when parliamentarians are in Parliament, and even with the issue of what has come to light with the President, whether or not that would not be served better by people debating it, rather than making a Parliament sitting unworkable and fall into chaos. So while we are sitting here and we are really deploring the fact that indeed Parliament must look and deploy ways in which it can deal with matters when there is an impasse, we must equally hold the different political parties responsible around the tactics, because these are tactics. They are tactics of political parties who come into Parliament and deploy even certain people who are going to rise up and either refuse to leave or whatever. And I'm asking myself whether are we not seeing a time where the tactics themselves are violent, where the hurling of insults itself is a violent act. And I'm not saying that it basically then says that they need to be violent, but I'm saying the whole issue cannot be singled out. It's like a scrambled egg. You can't unscramble it. You then cannot say members of Parliament who use a particular tactic to stop the robust discussion that the previous speaker was speaking about, to stop it and not allow it, and not allow all of us as South Africans who voted, and regardless of who you voted for, once they are in Parliament, they've got to execute the mission of Parliament, where they themselves, as a tactic, as a political party tactic, say this conversation is not going to take it and we are not going to leave because what we want to do is not being allowed. And we must also look at that side of, what is the kind of tactics that they are then using. Because at any point in time, everybody else in that Parliament was responsible for dealing with the violence in that Parliament. Those that were asked to leave could have recorded their dissatisfaction and then left that conversation to take place. And equally, those that were then called by those that were refusing to leave, the way that they treated women is so indicative of what we allow and how we allow women to be treated in society. And the insults that are being hurled is so indicative of just how we are seeing elected officials unable to have a rigorous conversation that demands accountability, but that is less violent in the manner and disruptive in the manner that we have seen. And I think the South African public deserves better.
Lebogang Ramafoko is the CEO of Oxfam South Africa. Ma'am, thank you for availing yourself this morning.